In this video, I'm going to count down my top 15 shots from 12 Angry Men, an ultra-famous movie about 12 sweaty, angry jurors in the United States hashing it out over a jury deliberation, trying to figure out whether the accused is guilty of murder or not. The video is going to give some spoilers, yet I think it's going to be very helpful for people who haven't watched the movie to prep for it or to think through it, and definitely this movie is for those who have seen the movie. As of right now, this is the number 5 ranked movie on IMDb.com, which has lots and lots of ratings, people rating on it. So it's been a highly acclaimed movie by average or normal or worldwide moviegoers for a long, long time. And I still get young people telling me how great a movie this is, how much it is so watchable and wonderful. The first shot is the first shot of the movie, and many people may not notice this. It's an establishment shot which shows you where you're going into, where the action is going to take place. A courthouse, but the camera tilts up here and it goes way up, and you see the awesome dominance of this courthouse building, which looks downright Greek with the Corinthian columns. It's like a Greek temple, as the architecture in so many courthouses has been. And the awesome weight of the decision is shown here. You feel like the building is dominating you, maybe falling on top of you. When the shot goes all the way up to the top, you actually get a little glimpse of the sky above the courthouse. Of course, the weather is going to be important in this movie. It's going to be hot in one part of the movie, raining later on. Maybe this hints at what's above these men, what's above the courthouse itself, the sky god, something beyond the heavens, as it were. But notice that shot is going to cut right as the camera goes up beyond the courthouse. My number 2 shot is about the 3rd or 4th shot of the movie, and it's a wide shot of the men, the jurors in the courtroom. This is the first glimpse we get of these men. In fact, it's our introduction to them, and if you pay attention, you can kind of get a flavor for each one of these jurors. As the movie goes along, they kind of are in a position that kind of looks like their default position or type as they develop throughout the movie. As an example, the really old bigot, maybe the nastiest one in the whole jury, is out there asleep or looking asleep. The other one is the Lee Cobb character, is going to be, spoiler, the lone holdout for the 11-1 guilty vote. He's the last guilty vote standing. And here he is looking, not paying attention, slouching off. And notice how these two are in alignment. They're kind of similar in this movie. The accused is guilty, guilty, guilty. There's no reason needed for this almost, or the reason is a rationalization. And look at the way that they are participating in this jury right now, as opposed to our white knight Henry Fonda figure. Quite often in this movie, in the early going, in the thinking man's position or in a thinking posture, always looking contemplative. He's wondering about what's going on, speculating in his mind, and with that white suit on, he's kind of a white knight figure in the movie, I think. My 3rd favorite shot of this movie is one of the longest dissolves I can ever remember seeing. You get a shot of the accused, the young man who is accused of murder here, and he's called an other or a they in the movie. The jurors call him they, a kid from the slums. We know that he's an ethnic minority figure. Is he Puerto Rican? Like, what exactly is he? It's not entirely clear, I think, in this movie. But when the movie moves into the deliberation room, how does it do it? It's this very long dissolve of his image on top of the deliberation room, as if, part of this transition is he's a ghost, a shadow, an image haunting this room. I think that's one of many ideas you can get from this, but certainly his own figure looms large over the room, and it does literally in this dissolve. My 4th shot here is a long take in which you get the character of Davis, the architect, Henry Fonda character, who at the beginning of the movie in the deliberation room has his back toward you mostly, and again, he's in a thinking man's posture. He's also a man of mystery. And the movie is going to set you up for the end. And all movies or a lot of movies kind of persuade you that the end should come, the end should happen. And in Hollywood movies like this, a lot of movies, there are little hints that the ending is coming, so that if you rewatch it, you can kind of see the ending showing up beforehand. Some people would call this foreshadowing. I certainly call it persuasion, because I think a movie needs to convince viewers that the ending is reasonable. Now, here in this image, you get on the far right side Davis, on the far left side the Lee Cobb character, the two figures who are going to be standing alone by themselves in their own vote. First, Davis on the right, not guilty, the only not guilty verdict at first. Lee Cobb character on the left, the only guilty verdict later in the movie, and they're standing by themselves and diametrically opposed. They are literally opposed in this movie. They're kind of hero-villain as well throughout the entire movie, and protagonist-antagonist. In this particular shot, early in the movie, the Lee Cobb character has the bunch of guys, at least 3 of them at the table, next to him. And that, of course, is symbolizing, I think, that Davis stands alone at this point, his not guilty verdict, where these other guys are guilty. They're all together in a heap. And then, of course, over the course of the movie, Davis and the Cobb character are going to fight over, in a sense, the decisions, the reason, the votes of all of these men. In fact, between the two of them is the deliberation table and the men that they're going to wrangle over. And, of course, the men, as the movie goes along, go over to the Davis side and all start to vote not guilty with him. Early in the movie, before the first vote is even taken, you get a whiff of that vote. Davis, all alone, not guilty. Lee Cobb and the rest of the men say guilty, and here they are. Number 5 shot is the first vote in the movie. This is the first vote where they say guilty or not guilty, and here you have a show of hands, all of which are guilty at this point, except for our lone white knight figure, Davis the architect. At the bottom of the screen, this is basic character positioning. Here you have all of the men, the whole table, shown to you in the frame, and then the weight of them is kind of coming down upon, if you look at this literally in a 2D perspective, the man at the bottom, the Davis character, who is burdened with his not guilty verdict, which he doesn't know if is true or false, yet he has his reasons, or his feelings at least, for why he's voting not guilty, and he's at the very bottom, usually a position, or a lot of times at least, certainly in the 1950s in terms of film grammar, at the bottom is the least valuable part. He's burdened, he is being hounded, he is small, he's pathetic, he's weak, and certainly here the masses are lording it over him. I love that the stockbroker is right on top of him, the voice of reason, as it were, for the guilty verdict throughout the entire movie, with his glasses, his intellectual or thoughtful, calculating air. Of course, right next to him is the other, guilty verdict, the Lee Cobb character, and they're right on top, almost, of our Davis character. So interesting how the placement kind of shows how these characters are opposed or with each other. And of course, the first person to vote not guilty, as it were, with Davis is the old man sitting right next to him. And by the way, the next shot, which goes along with the last one, is this. Here's Davis voting not guilty. I love that he's associated with the women's bathroom, by the way. I have more to say about that in this video. But the women's bathroom is sitting up there. The men's is on the left side of the screen. Here's Davis, and he's near the top, which means maybe he's dominant in the shot, but I don't think so, because the foreman is looming over the foreground. All the men are turned towards him. And again, he's feeling crowded. He's feeling claustrophobic. Or we feel that for him in his not guilty vote. It's very hard, for example, for a person to deviate from the crowd, the norm, and be the lone person, or most people at least, to be the lone person to hold out, or to vote differently, or to be completely different from the masses of the crowd. And this is how it feels like. This framing of this shows you how Davis feels. Now, my 6th shot actually is a series of shots in the movie. You will see that women's bathroom I mentioned many, many times in this movie. This is a deliberation room with a men's and women's bathroom. It's a single-room movie mostly, but the camera does go into the men's bathroom a couple of times. Here's Davis explaining his not guilty vote on the far left side, sometimes also a position of weakness, and associated with the women's bathroom over there on the far right is the lone bigot who has nose problems, allergy problems, and he's kind of, in this particular shot, not paying attention. Interesting that the women's bathroom is featured. Why? Lots of possible reasons. It is interesting that in the 1950s in the United States, at least in the state courthouses or in state cases, that women were still gaining the right to be on juries. There's still 3 or 4, by the time of 1957, 3 or 4 states that haven't granted that right or privilege to women, and so you would not have had a women's bathroom in some states because they weren't allowed on the jury. The movie calls out in its title, we're talking about men reasoning here. Men as a democratic mass trying to come to a decision. Where are the women at, though? And I think the women loom large with this women's bathroom sign and the word women prominently featured in the movie if you're looking for it. And a lot of the time hovering over Davis, who is empathetic and wants to hash things out and talk things out with all the men who, all the rest of these guys who voted guilty, want to go home very quickly. My number 7 shot comes pretty early in the movie, and it's the Lee Cobb character on the right with Davis, the architect, in the left in the foreground, over the shoulder shot here, in which the Cobb character talks about his son, shows a picture, too, that Davis and maybe some of the other guys are watching this too. Again, this is a shot that sets you up for the very ending. How does the Lee Cobb character come to the not guilty vote in the end? Well, we come to find out, I think, my interpretation is, he's got psychological baggage, and his guilty vote for the young man accused of the murder is sort of projection from his own relationship with the son onto the accused. And he accuses all young men, or he doesn't like young men, and that's because of his son and his problems with his own son. So we learn about that here about 20 minutes into the movie. Of course, later on, this becomes super significant because in this movie, at least, we need 12 not guilty votes by the end. So the psychological baggage is here. I love that the shadow of Cobb is over that picture right there, looming over, like surrounding it, dominating, like his negative image and his darker self is haunting, that picture of he and his son who don't get along. My number 8 shot is kind of creepy. In the, I think, late 1950s, about around here, they started doing more extreme close shots, getting the camera up into the faces of people, experimenting with that, its meanings. Although that had happened throughout film history, it's less prominent. It's less of a less used. I feel like I can claim that in most standard Hollywood movies. So it's always weird when you get a character almost looking at you. This is almost a fourth wall break, and the old man, who seems to be at times a sage or a guru or all-wise Yoda figure, who's the second not guilty vote. You kind of get up into his face, and he's speaking slowly, and it feels like some kind of spiritual energy to me coming out of him as his sage-like presence dominates. But it's also very weird, and I feel a little off-putting because these extreme close shots or semi-extreme close shots feel pretty awkward. We're up in the space, the uncomfortable personal space of somebody's face or body. And 12 Angry Men uses a lot of these much more closer shots, especially just to ramp up the intensity in the movie in certain parts. You got other guys' faces, but the old man's face in particular is one of those places you're going to go to a lot in the movie. My number 9 shot comes about in the middle of the movie, 40 minutes in which Davis is starting to gain a foothold, starting to get a couple of not guilty votes, and he is starting to reason through the process of the accused possibly not being guilty, having reasonable doubt. I find this movie, one of its attractive components is it does really good at thinking through a problem and these guys talking out that problem. I think it promotes better thinking. Whether they actually get the verdict right or not is interesting, and they may not get the verdict right, as it turns out at the end of the movie. But how to reason through a problem and come to, the question of what's reasonable doubt versus certainty, what's rationality versus irrationality, and all these guys play different types, maybe even different parts of the brain, different types of reasoning or non-reasoning, as it were. Well, Davis is a figure of contemplativeness and empathy, and wondering about, what if, and he does a lot of supposing, a word that comes up in this movie. Now, in this particular shot, note his dominance. Now, finally, he's standing over the table. He's looming over the table, and in this particular scene, watch the blocking in this movie in any particular shot to know what you're supposed to think about each character. Here, Davis is gaining some authority, some dominance, and some hierarchy and prominence, of course, with that women's bathroom still in the background. My number 10 shot, and as we've seen, these two are a pair throughout the movie, including from the first time we see the jurors, the stockbroker on the right, the Lee Cobb character on the left, and here, on the right, the voice of reason for guilty, with on the left the sort of emotional energy of guilty. That, if you want to think about these men as types of a person or of a brain, as I said, look at these two guys as a pair together because they fit so well. They sit by each other, they help each other out, or at least on the left, the emotion and the energy, it gives some weight to the reason on the right from the stockbroker. And the stockbroker, of course, is pictured with a newspaper throughout, because I think part of that is literacy, reading, and calculation on the part of him. And when he confronts the Davis character over a number of pieces of evidence, it's so interesting to watch these shots as you see both Lee Cobb and the stockbroker together. My 11 and 12 shots go together because, in the middle of this movie, the vast reasoning of these characters, you get the not guilty vote confronted with all kinds of evidence and reasons why they have to be wrong. And you see here in this particular shot, Davis sort of being confronted and claustrophobic, as I said before, with a number of these shots. He's smaller here compared to these other guys. He's being looked at. He's being surrounded. He's being surrounded by a couple of not guilty votes and a couple of guilty votes at this point, with the table sort of almost penetrating into him there. He is confronted. He is surrounded. And, of course, this is a movie about democracy and reasoning in democracy, or reasoning in a group or a mass of people, most of whom are irrational, or they are going based on their desires or will or their preconceived notions. And, of course, at the beginning of the movie, they just want to get out of this deliberation room and say guilty and move on with their lives, not considering what they've heard, very much at least, in the courtroom. Well, Davis wants to hash that out, as we've said. And yet, look at how he is totally surrounded by these men and confronted the feeling of being a voice who's talking amongst the masses. Just get on social media and say anything interesting, and you will be hounded by a lot of people who have wills and desires as their priority, or their preconceived notions. So this movie does that. Now, it does with my number 12 shot, the Lee Cobb character, same thing. When he's saying guilty, 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 here this emotional rage comes out of him, and here he once again is surrounded. And in the backdrop, you see how those last two shots are very similar, where Davis is surrounded and then the Lee Cobb character. Those come within 5 minutes of each other in the movie. My number 13 shot is the leader of the movie. This comes late in the movie when the men are taking a break, about in the early of the part of the third act of the movie. Each man is a particular character type. They represent a vocation, a piece of society, maybe even, as I suggested, a part of the brain or a part of the reasoning process. Well, the guy on the right is a coach. He happens to be the foreman elected to be juror number 1, the leader of this group. Eternal question for this movie, and, well, for maybe democratic politics, is like, who's a leader? What does it mean to be a leader when really the masses, or supposedly the masses, are in charge? Everybody gets to vote. Everybody has a say. Who's a leader in that, and how do you sort of corral everybody together? This guy has umpteen thousand problems in the movie, getting all these emotionally charged, sweaty guys together, and he doesn't seem to want to do it. Maybe he's a little wimpy. Maybe he's sort of part of beta male. I'm not sure that's the case, but given his outfit and given his demeanor and stature, certainly he is short, which is interesting because that's tends to be, at least in movies at this time, means lesser or less dominant. Here, Davis, who has wrangled a lot of not guilty votes at this point in the movie, this is an hour and 6 minutes in, is maybe more dominant than the coach, but they're having a friendly exchange about life outside the deliberation room. And I think that's really interesting that the coach here, the leader, wants to be sociable, which is something some of the other men don't want to be with each other. My number 14 shot is of the old bigot. That's what I call him, because he seems to be the nastiest character in the movie, which is helpful because the Lee Cobb character, the last guilty vote, you're supposed to not like him, feel he's villainous, feel he's irrational. I actually like him, as it turns out. But the old bigot, you don't. So you have that contrast between the semi-villain, who's the last guilty holdout, and then this ultimate jerk right here, the old bigot, who stands alone. He goes on a rant early in the movie. No one seems to care too much. He goes on a second rant later in the movie. This is 1 hour and 19 minutes in, and everyone sort of stands up, leaves the table, leaves them all alone, as if the masses or the democracy or all the men in the democracy reject this bigot's views of the accused, of the people in the slums. Really interesting. Although it is actually the stockbroker still sitting at the table. He's not going to get up, but I think he does reject the old bigot as well. My number 15 shot, really it's the last two shots of the movie. It's outside the courthouse, one of the couple of shots. The first two in the movie, or the first one in the movie, is outside the courthouse. The last two shots are as well. And you see the character of Davis and McCardle, the old man, shake hands and say so long to each other, the only two men named in the movie, with the pillars of justice looming large over them, which we saw in the very first shot of the movie. But the movie leaves us on the courthouse steps to look out onto a plaza, a road, a social area, and a bunch of people, the masses, the unknown masses, except for Davis, looming, including a couple of women. They're the only glimpses of women we actually get in this movie. This is a super interesting shot because it leaves us pondering the courthouse, the court case, and maybe still in the mindset of justice. We're not leaving justice behind and going to our ordinary lives as everyone else is in the jury room. The viewer and the camera are still there pondering it. And I find this last shot also has amazing music. I mean, the musical chord does not resolve as it should, or as it would have if this movie had been made 10 years early. It's a wild, dissonant chord at the very end of this movie. It's a fascinating ending. And look, the stable pillar on the left, the movement of the people on the right, the oblique, sort of like oblique lines in this going every which way, top left to bottom right, and so on. It's a little off kilter, I feel like. This movie, I feel like actually that we don't know if the accused is guilty or not. You could argue either way. The men say they have reasonable doubt, but do they really know if they let a murderer off? I don't think anybody can be certain. Of course, deliberation is uncertain, and the result is uncertain, and that's the nature of justice. I think that's what the ending with the music, the lines in this is getting at. So all in all, what do you think of this video? The shot and other shots are interesting stuff in 12 Angry Men. Let us know in the comments. Please subscribe to this channel for more great content. Thank you. Have a great day.